My name is Matthew Hayes, I'm 41 years old, and today I'm going to tell you something that may sound unbelievable. But I swear on my life that every detail really happened. Maybe you've felt that chill down your spine when it seems like everything you've built is about to be taken away from you. That's exactly what I went through in a small town called Santa Esperanza, a place that could be anywhere in the US or Mexico, because what really matters here isn't the map, but what God decided to do. Santa Esperanza had always been a simple town. Worn cobblestone streets, cafes where everyone knows your name, and a town square where life seems to move slower than anywhere else. And at the heart of that town stood our church, St. Clare's Chapel, a century-old building that had withstood floods, storms, and even seasons when faith was something people were ridiculed for. It was more than brick and wood. It was a living memory of generations who had found comfort, hope, and quiet miracles within its walls. It all began on a muggy morning. I was sorting papers in the sacristy when I heard heavy steps coming up the porch. They weren't the footsteps of neighbors or children running in to play on the pews. They were hard, deliberate, like someone arriving with authority. The door swung open, and 3 men came in. 2 carried clipboards with bureaucratic expressions, and the third wore a pale suit, a tight tie, and unblinking eyes. The energy they brought wasn't of visitors, it was of judgment. The man in the suit opened a yellow folder and said my name in a flat, formal tone. "Mr. Matthew Hayes, I have here an order signed by the town mayor. This church will be demolished in 48 hours. Reason: unauthorized construction and unapproved activities." For a second, my legs almost gave out. The paper in his hand seemed to weigh more than the entire building. I tried to argue, to show documents, to speak about the chapel's history, but the man raised his hand and cut my words like an invisible blade. "It's no use. The decision has been made. Prepare to leave." They turned their backs and left, leaving behind a silence so heavy it felt like it might crush me. I leaned against the pulpit where I had so often preached about hope. But at that moment, even my faith felt like it was slipping through my fingers. What would I say to an entire community that was about to see its refuge destroyed? What would I tell the elderly who had buried their loved ones in the small cemetery behind the chapel? What about the children who had learned to sing in the choir, believing this place was indestructible? I ran out to the square and called everyone I could find. Word spread quickly, and by the afternoon, dozens of people were gathered outside the church. There was Mrs. Abigail, with her white hair and her cane tapping against the stones, as steady as the rock she had always been. Mr. Lincoln, a retired mason, looked at the chapel walls the way a father looks at a threatened child. Rachel, the town pharmacist, arrived carrying medicine and a determined look. And more came. Young people with guitars, whole families, even neighbors who didn't attend services regularly, but knew this chapel was the town's beating heart. When I told them about the demolition order, a heavy silence fell over the group. It was Mrs. Abigail who broke it, her voice shaking but filled with courage. "If they tear this church down, they'll have to go through me first. My husband is buried here. I raised my children here. This is where I laid all my pain before God." Her words echoed like a silent thunderclap. No one wailed, but their teary eyes spoke louder than any scream. The young people joined hands, the families held each other close, and at that moment I realized the mayor might have power over papers, but he had no idea of the invisible force that was about to rise against his decree. Night fell, but no one left. We made a circle, lit candles, sang old hymns, and told stories about what each of us had experienced inside those walls. A little boy named Daniel said that was where he first prayed for his father's health. An elderly woman shared that it was at that altar where she was set free from the addiction that had been destroying her family. And each testimony was like a stone placed on the invisible wall rising up against the mayor's order. It was as if the whole town had decided to breathe together in one shared hope. But the early hours brought something no one expected. While everyone rested quietly, the chapel bell, which was rarely rung, began to sway on its own. It wasn't a loud toll, just a soft sound, almost shy, like a warning. Some said it was just the wind. Others swore they saw a golden light pass through the windows. My own heart started racing, and I couldn't explain why. Moments later, the sound of engines echoed in the distance. A backhoe appeared on the main road, followed by trucks and city vehicles. The heart of the town seemed to skip a beat. This was the beginning of the end, or maybe the beginning of something beyond explanation. If you've made it this far, understand this. This isn't just the story of a church. This is the story of how, when the impossible stands before us, heaven decides to come down and prove there is a power greater than any human decree. And what was about to happen in Santa Esperanza would challenge logic, science, and even the way you believe in miracles. The sun had barely started to rise when the engines grew louder. The roar of the machine swallowed the early morning silence in Santa Esperanza. The ground trembled slightly, as if each metal step was a threat to everything these people had built over decades. The bright yellow backhoe moved forward with the confidence of something that believes it cannot be stopped. Behind it came 2 trucks loaded with tools and no entry signs. The white city car pulled up in front of the chapel, and out stepped the same attorney from the previous afternoon, now with 2 cold-faced security guards, as if they were just performing another routine task. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to leave. As of now, this property is officially closed by order of the mayor. His voice rang out across the square, but no one moved. Instead, one by one, the townspeople stood up. Mrs. Abigail leaned on her cane and was the first to step forward, standing firmly in front of the chapel gate. Behind her, Mr. Lincoln crossed his arms and planted his feet like roots. Rachel, the pharmacist, took 2 children by the hand and stood beside them. The circle grew quickly, becoming a living barrier. There were no shouts, no insults, only a silence so full of conviction that it didn't need words. The attorney took a deep breath, adjusted his glasses, and repeated, "You have to leave. This is an official order." But at that moment, what spoke louder than any decree were the shining eyes on people's faces. It was as if each one had discovered a courage they never knew they had. I, who had been trying to stay rational, realized that what I was witnessing had something supernatural about it. These simple townspeople, used to daily struggles just to survive, were willing to stand against machines, papers, and authorities to defend a place that was more than just a church. It was home, memory, faith. The backhoe's engine roared to life and took a few steps forward. The metallic noise pierced everyone's ears. But when the machine reached the first line of people, the operator stopped. Not because he was ordered to, but because he couldn't keep going. He looked at those motionless figures standing in front of the steel, and his eyes began to tremble. The man climbed out of the cab, threw his helmet on the ground, and said, "I'm not doing this. I know this church. My mother learned to read here as a child. I will not be the one to destroy this place." The silence that followed was broken by the spontaneous applause of the crowd. The attorney, unsure how to react, made an irritated gesture, but his face betrayed something. He, too, was shaken. And then more people began arriving. I don't know where they came from, but the square filled up by the minute. The baker closed his shop and brought fresh bread for those who had been standing all night. 2 young men pushed a wheelbarrow full of bottled water. The owner of the grocery store handed out fruit. Even some of the police officers who had come to enforce the order stood watching silently. One of them removed his hat and quietly joined the circle of townspeople. It was as if something unseen was touching every heart. That was when I realized this was no longer about defending bricks and mortar. This was a living testimony of faith. Every passing minute, the silent resistance became a human wall no machine would dare to cross. The attorney tried to call someone at City Hall, speaking in a low voice, but his hand was trembling. I walked up to him and calmly said, "Look around you. You're not just looking at citizens. You're looking at faith in the flesh, the unexplainable taking shape right before your eyes." He turned away, but I knew he understood. Time seemed to slow down. The sun climbed higher, casting golden light on tired but determined faces. Children began to sing old hymns their grandmothers had taught them. The entire square echoed like a single choir. Passers-by couldn't resist. They stopped, watched, and many of them joined the circle. Before my eyes, Santa Esperanza was becoming a fortress of hope. And this is where I want to speak directly to you watching this right now. Maybe you too are surrounded by situations that seem impossible, by decrees that seem unbreakable, by machines coming to tear down your dreams. But I need to tell you this. When a people decide to rise up in faith, the impossible trembles. It's no accident you've made it this far into this story. God may be using this very moment to speak to you. I want to ask you for something special. If this story is already touching your heart, subscribe to this channel right now. Not as just another click, but as a step of faith and unity with this community. And more. Write in the comments what you would do if you were standing with these people. Would you put yourself in front of the machines? Would you have the courage to defend what is sacred to you? I want to read your answer, because your participation is part of this movement of faith we are building here together. What happened next in Santa Esperanza cannot be explained by human logic. This was the moment when the unexplainable began to manifest in a way that would forever change the fate of that church and of the entire town. The morning dragged on, but the air grew heavier. The city attorney tried to keep his voice firm, but it no longer carried the same authority. He repeated the decrees, quoted the law, but the crowd stood unmoving, like a silent army. I stood inside the chapel, with the Bible open on the pulpit, feeling that something was about to happen. The clock was nearing noon when a sudden wind swept through the square. It wasn't the dry wind Santa Esperanza was used to, but a gentle breeze carrying a sweet fragrance, as if flowers had decided to bloom out of season. People looked around, confused. I closed my eyes and felt a peace that didn't come from me. And then everything changed. In the clear sky with not a single cloud, a golden light began to appear. At first it looked like sunlight reflecting off something, but soon it was clear it was not that. The light moved, as if it were dancing, and slowly descended toward the square. Children pointed with wide eyes. Adults glanced at each other in disbelief. The backhoe operator removed his helmet and fell to his knees. The police officers who had come to break up the crowd bowed their heads in silence. What we saw wasn't ordinary. It was as if heaven itself had decided to come down and protect that place. Suddenly, music began to spread. It didn't come from instruments, it didn't come from human voices. It was a melody that touched the heart, a song you felt more than you heard. I saw tears rolling down the faces of people who had never stepped foot inside the church. A man who had always mocked faith held his face in his hands, shaking his head like someone who couldn't comprehend what he was witnessing. And that's when a voice spoke. Not through a microphone, not from the crowd, but through the very wind. Why are you weeping? Don't you know that I am the owner of this land? The voice came from everywhere at once, strong as thunder, yet gentle as a mother's song. I trembled from head to toe and dropped to my knees, unable to stand under the weight of that presence. People looked at one another, realizing they were not imagining it. It was real. All of Santa Esperanza seemed to breathe as one, in holy reverence. I do not dwell in walls of stone. I dwell in the hearts of those who believe. But today, before your very eyes, I show you that nothing can destroy what I have consecrated. The attorney took a deep breath, adjusted his glasses, and repeated, "You must leave. This is an official order." But in that moment, what spoke louder than any decree were the glowing eyes of the people standing there. It was as if each one had found a courage they didn't even know they had. I, who had been trying to be rational until then, realized that what I was witnessing had something supernatural about it. These simple people, used to fighting for daily survival, were willing to face down machines, documents, and authorities to defend a place that was more than a temple. It was home, memory, faith. The backhoe's engine roared to life and rolled forward a few feet. The metallic noise rang in everyone's ears. But as the machine drew close to the first line of people, the operator froze. Not because he was ordered to stop, but because he couldn't go on. He stared at those motionless figures standing in front of steel, and his eyes began to tremble. He climbed down from the cab, threw his helmet on the ground, and said, "I'm not doing this. I know this church. My mother learned to read here as a child. I won't be the one to destroy this place." The silence that followed was shattered by the crowd's spontaneous applause. The attorney, unsure how to react, gestured angrily, but his face betrayed something. He was shaken too. And then more people began arriving. I don't know from where, but the square filled by the minute. The baker closed his shop and brought warm bread for those who had stood through the night. 2 young men arrived, pushing a wheelbarrow full of bottled water. The grocer handed out fruit. Even some of the police officers sent to enforce the order stood quietly, just watching. One removed his hat and joined the circle of townspeople without a word. It was as though something invisible was touching every heart. And then it happened. The air shifted. The resistance was no longer just about bricks and wood. It had become a living testimony of faith. Every passing minute, the silent crowd became a human wall no machine would dare to cross. The attorney tried calling City Hall, speaking in a low voice, but his hands were shaking. I walked over to him and said softly, "Look around you. You're not just seeing citizens. You're seeing faith incarnate. You're watching the unexplainable take shape before your very eyes." He turned away, but I knew he understood. Time seemed to slow. The sun climbed higher, turning tired faces gold, but not breaking their resolve. Children began singing old hymns their grandmothers had taught them. The whole square became a choir. Passers-by stopped watching, and many joined the circle. Santa Esperanza was becoming, before my eyes, a fortress of hope. The attorney kept speaking legal terms, but his voice no longer had the same weight. And then the light came. At first faint, then blinding. So bright that many closed their eyes, and yet they still saw it. Some raised their hands, others simply wept. Then came the sign. Dozens of figures appeared among the crowd. Men, women, children. Some faces recognizable, others not. A woman beside me cried out, "That's my son, but he died 10 years ago." Another man wept, saying he saw his brother who had died in an accident. The faces were calm, full of peace, as if they had been sent on a mission. They did not speak. They simply took their places around the church, forming an invisible wall. I saw something I will never forget. Among them was the face of my father. He had passed away 5 years earlier, and there he stood, steady, his eyes full of light. My heart nearly stopped. He said nothing, just smiled. And that was enough to make me know this was no illusion. Heaven and earth had met in Santa Esperanza. The mayor, alerted about the situation, arrived shortly after. He stepped out of his car with an air of authority, but when he saw the scene, he froze. He tried to speak, but his voice broke. He walked toward me and whispered, "Professor Hayes, what is happening here? Who are all these people? Why is the entire town standing here?" I looked him in the eye and answered with a courage that wasn't mine. "They are not ordinary people, Mr. Mayor. They are sent from God, and no human decree can tear down what heaven has decided to protect." He shook his head, unable to process it, but every testimony he heard shook him further. An elderly woman stepped forward and told him that at 4 in the morning she felt a hand on her shoulder and heard a voice saying, "Get up and go protect my house." A young man said he had dreamed the exact same thing. The mayor, a man of science and politics, could no longer deny what he was seeing. His eyes filled with tears and he said nothing. That afternoon became something no one would ever forget. The sky seemed closer, the town more united, and the impossible had become reality. Sainty. Claire's chapel was no longer just a building threatened with demolition. It had become a living sign that the divine still breaks through into our world. And now I have to ask you watching this video, have you ever experienced something that defies all logic? Have you felt God step in when everything seemed lost? Share your experience in the comments. Your story might ignite faith in someone who needs hope right now. By then, the sun was high as the mayor walked closer to the church. His presence carried weight, not just because of his office, but because of the way he walked. He was known as a firm man, closed to negotiations, but that day his face no longer had the same hardness. He looked at the crowd as if seeing something that surpassed his convictions. In his hands he held the leather folder containing decrees and documents, but it looked unbearably heavy. He asked for silence, and out of respect, everyone fell quiet. "Tell me," he said, "what makes so many people stand against an official order? Aren't you afraid of the consequences?" It was Mrs. Abigail who answered, her voice hoarse but firm like wind against a storm. "Mr. Mayor, we are not here out of rebellion. We are here because this place is sacred. It's not just stone and mortar. Here we buried our tears. Here we received comfort, here we learned to begin again. You can tear down walls, but you cannot tear down faith. Her words pierced the air like arrows. The mayor took a deep breath and said, I do not believe in miracles. I am a practical man, but I admit, I've never seen anything like this. People who should be home sleeping, here since before dawn, still as statues. And then these stories, of visions, of voices. His voice broke. The attorney tried to interrupt. Mr. Mayor, the law is clear, but the mayor raised his hand and cut him off. I know the law. What I don't know is this power that makes an entire city rise up without weapons, without shouting, only with faith. Suddenly, an elderly woman stepped forward. She wasn't known by everyone. Her white hair blew in the wind. Her hands trembled, but her voice was clear. Mr. Mayor, my name is Hope Morales. I am not a regular churchgoer, but at 4 a.m. I heard a voice call my name and say, Go protect my house. I tried to ignore it, but the voice came again, stronger, and brought me here. The mayor's eyes widened. Others began confirming they had heard the same call, at the same hour. Different people, same details. The mayor covered his face with his hand, stunned. This can't be coincidence, but how do you explain it? A young man answered from the crowd. You don't explain it, sir. You believe it. And in that moment, I saw something shift in the mayor's face. The man who was used to controlling everything now stood before something beyond his power. He called me aside to speak privately, but no one moved. I walked to him with my heart pounding. Professor Hayes, he said, I came here planning to tear this building down. But after what I've seen, I cannot just give the order to advance. If I do, I won't just be confronting people. I'll be challenging something I don't understand. I looked him in the eye and said calmly, Mr. Mayor, what you're witnessing is not my work, nor the congregation's. It is God's work. And when he decides to intervene, no human authority can stand against him. You have a choice. You can enforce your decree, or you can allow this church to continue being a beacon for this town. The silence was so deep even the wind seemed to stop. Then, in front of everyone, the mayor turned to the crowd and said, I still don't believe in miracles, but I believe in what I'm seeing. And what I see is a people willing to give their lives for this place. Therefore, I declare the demolition order suspended until further notice. The square erupted in applause, tears, and embraces. Some people knelt down, others raised their hands toward heaven. The sound was not just victory, it was relief, as if the very town had been saved. But the most astonishing thing happened next. As soon as the mayor finished speaking, the golden light over the square grew brighter. And for a brief moment everyone felt something physical, almost tangible, a peace that settled on every heart. Police officers, workers, city officials, all were taken by the same reverent silence. There was no more confrontation, only a shared recognition that something far greater was in control. The mayor stepped closer to me and said quietly, I don't know how I'm going to explain this back at City Hall, but I know I cannot ignore it. He gripped my hand firmly and added, I may never be a man of faith like you, but today I learned to respect what I don't understand. That moment was etched into the memory of everyone who was there. It wasn't just a politician changing his mind. It was a proud heart bowing to the greatness of the unexplainable. The news spread through the town in just a few hours. In the cafes, the bakeries, on every street corner, people were saying, the mayor backed down. The church is still standing. But for those who had been there, what spread was not just news. It was testimony. And you who are listening to this story, I want you to reflect with me. How many times has something impossible risen against you, and it felt like there was no way out? How many times have you stood before decrees that threatened your dreams? Write in the comments about the most impossible situation you have ever faced. Who knows? Your answer might become the spark of hope someone else needs to read right now. After that day when the mayor suspended the demolition order, it seemed like life in Santa Esperanza would go back to normal. But it didn't, because something had changed, not just in the square, not just in the walls of the church, but in the hearts of the people. It was as if a flame had been lit, and no one could put it out. The news spread like wildfire. People from distant neighborhoods came to the chapel just to see it with their own eyes. Some came out of curiosity, others out of skepticism, but nearly all of them left transformed. The following week, the church was packed like never before. The old wooden pews were filled, the narrow aisles were lined with people, even the open windows became spots for those who wanted to listen. Children sat on the floor, young people leaned against the walls. Even those who weren't religious came, because the whole town was saying, something happened there that no one can explain. And it was in that atmosphere of expectation that the first miracle happened. A little girl named Clara, only 9 years old, was carried in by her father. She suffered from a rare bone disease that forced her to use crutches and live in constant pain. The doctors had already said there was nothing more they could do. That night, while we were singing a simple hymn, the girl stood up on her own. The crutches hit the ground, and the sound of her footsteps echoed like thunder in our souls. She began to walk, then run, and her little voice cried out, "Jesus healed me." Her father broke down in tears, hugging his daughter as if she had been given back from the dead. The service ended in tears, laughter, and embraces. From that night forward, no one doubted that God was moving. But it didn't stop there. A few days later, a woman named Teresa, diagnosed with advanced cancer, asked for prayer. There was no spectacle, no shouting, just a simple prayer of faith. 3 months later, she returned with her test results. There was no trace of cancer left. Her doctor stood beside her, stunned, admitting he had no explanation. In front of the congregation, Teresa said, "I didn't just receive healing, I received a new life, because now I know that God is real." What began to happen was something no one had planned. Workers who had never attended church began sharing dreams where they were called to change their lives. Young people struggling with addictions came asking for help, saying they heard a voice calling them in the middle of the night. Even those who had never believed in anything said they felt an unexplainable peace when they stepped inside that place. It was as if the chapel had turned into a lighthouse, drawing in all those who were weary, sick, or desperate. And perhaps the most surprising thing of all, even the mayor, the man who had once come to tear it all down, began attending. At first discreetly, from a distance, just listening. Later, closer, asking about Bible passages, seeking explanations. One evening after a service, he called me over and said, "Professor Hayes, I don't know if I believe like you do, but I know this place has changed the way I see life. Today I want to be a better leader because I have understood that there are things greater than myself." Those words were received as a sign that God wasn't just transforming individuals, but also the very structures of power. Each week, the miracles multiplied. Not just physical healings, but reconciliations. Broken marriages were restored. Fathers who hadn't spoken to their children embraced again. People drowning in debt began receiving unexpected provision. It was as if faith had become a practical force, changing real lives. And this wave began spreading beyond the city limits. People came from other regions, other states, even other countries, searching for that fire that couldn't be explained in words. But I want to open my heart to you who are watching this right now. All of this began because a group of people refused to bow to the impossible. Because instead of giving up, they chose to kneel before God. Because in the darkest moment, they chose to pray. And that's exactly where I want you to reflect. How many times have you given up before the answer came? How many times have you let go of the crutches of faith, thinking there was no way? Maybe your miracle is just one prayer away. Maybe the transformation you've been waiting for is simply waiting for you to take a stand like the people of Santa Esperanza did. I want you to be part of this. If this story is igniting something inside you, subscribe to this channel right now. But don't just click a button. Subscribe as if you are saying, "I will rise up in faith too." And more than that, write in the comments which area of your life you want to see God move in. It could be in your health, your family, your finances, your heart. Don't stay silent, because when you share, you're not just opening the door for your own miracle, you are inspiring others to believe again. And don't think the story ends here, because after so many signs, God still had something even greater prepared to show that His power knows no limits. Months passed since the day the machines backed away before the unexplainable in Santa Esperanza. The chapel, once under threat, had now become the beating heart of a quiet revolution. What had once been just an old building had turned into a living altar, where miracles multiplied like rain on dry land. Every service carried an atmosphere no one could quite describe. It was as if heaven had opened a permanent window over the city. It didn't take long for the authorities to recognize that something beyond politics was happening. The mayor, who had once climbed those church steps with demolition papers in hand, returned, but this time not with threats but with respect. He asked to speak to the congregation. The crowd fell silent. With tears in his eyes, he said, "When I came here the first time, I came with the intention of destroying what you held sacred. Today I stand before you to say that I have witnessed something I cannot explain. I saw an entire town united. I saw people saying they were called by the same voice in the middle of the night. I saw miracles that no doctor, no document could deny. Perhaps I will never become a man of faith like you, but I have learned that the faith of a people is something that not even the law can silence. That's why I declare St. Clair's Chapel, from this day forward, a protected landmark of this town." What happened next was indescribable. The square erupted in applause, but not just any applause. It was as if every clap was a prayer of gratitude. Strong men wept like children. Women danced as they embraced their children. Young people lifted handmade signs that read, "God is faithful." That scene was etched forever as the greatest celebration Santa Esperanza had ever witnessed. But the miracles didn't stop there. A young woman named Daniela, who had lost vision in one eye after an accident, received prayer during one of the services. In the middle of the prayer, she began to shout, I can see again." And indeed, the doctors confirmed it days later. Her vision had been completely restored. A shopkeeper who had gone bankrupt testified that after surrendering his life to God, not only were his finances restored, but his family as well. Husbands returned home, fathers reconciled with their children, even neighbors who hadn't spoken in years embraced once again. The impact was so great that neighboring towns began sending buses full of people to attend the services. The little chapel could no longer hold everyone. Services had to be moved outside, to the town square, under the open, starry sky. And with each gathering came more testimonies. Diseases healed, addictions broken, impossible jobs suddenly opening, entire families rebuilt. What had begun as a decree of destruction had turned into a movement of life. And now I want to speak to you, who have stayed with me until the very end of this story. Nothing that happened in Santa Esperanza was coincidence. It was living proof that when man says, "It's over," God replies, "This is just the beginning." Maybe you are facing your own decree of destruction, a marriage on the brink, an incurable illness crushing debt, or a future that seems hopeless. But just as God protected that little chapel, He can intervene in your life today. Before we close, I want to give you a special invitation. If this testimony touched your heart, subscribe to this channel, but not as just another video you follow. Subscribe as someone joining a family of faith that believes the impossible can still happen. And even more, write in the comments if this story spoke to you. Share which part moved your heart the most. Tell your own story, because your words might be the hope someone on the other side of the world is waiting to hear. And I want to know, what did you learn from this testimony? What lesson are you taking into your life? When you write, you're not just recording your faith. You become part of this story. Just like the men and women who stood before the machines, you too can stand today before the challenges of your life. This may be the end of the script, but it is not the end of the message. Because just like in Santa Esperanza, the miracles don't stop here. The same God who turned an order of destruction into a testimony of life is ready to move in your life right now. And may you never forget this. When everything seems lost, that is the very moment heaven decides to come down. So close your eyes for a moment, take a deep breath, and believe. Your miracle may be just one prayer away.